It was the birth of my daughter, and holding her in the delivery room, and this little tiny fragile person in my hands, and she opens her eyes, and my face is the first picture her brain's going to take. And up until that point, I was a complete self-absorbed narcissist. Everything I did was for my own self-aggrandizement. I didn't care who I hurt, whatever, didn't matter. But in that moment, I chose to make decisions with someone else other than me in mind, with my children. And with my son born 15 months later, I got to parent him the way I always wanted to be parented. And children's love is infectious. It's hard not to love them back. And I've been so cut off from my emotional self, living purely in the world of ego and narcissism with them. And we get that way, we come into the world, and I think of like who little Tony was. It's this bright, curious, mischievous, a little stubborn, defiant, sensitive, open to the world little guy. And life happens to us, and we put on armor to protect ourselves, to be safe. We put on masks to become someone who we're not in order to feel loved and accepted. And with my children, it began the thawing process of my heart, and the journey from my head to my heart. And because they're safe to love. At that age, they're not capable of rejection. They're not capable of ridicule. They're not capable of shaming. That comes when they're 13. But in that moment, it was safe for me to love them. And my children taught me it was really my first experience with compassion. And so when we're compassionate with someone, we hold a mirror up and allow them to see their humanity reflected back at them when they couldn't see it on their own. My children looked up at me like I was this magnificent dad and this magnificent human being. That's not who I saw when I looked in the mirror. But they helped me. I could see something that I couldn't see, but I could see it reflected through their face, through their eyes. And they couldn't say the word compassion. They couldn't understand what that concept was. So compassion is, it's a way of being. You be compassion, and that's what they did for me. When they were 4 and 6, when they were 2 and 4, me and the mother separated. When they were 4 and 6, I was a full-time single father, and my mother gave me the second lesson in compassion. Her love for me was unconditional. Her relationship with me was very conditional, and she taught me compassion when it's married with healthy boundaries and consequences. When I needed her help to raise children, I could barely take care of my own life, never mind 3. It's like, well, if you want me to babysit, you can't be going on marches. If you want me to pick the kids up after school, you can't be going on TV. And she taught me that healthy boundaries and consequences, which was a very powerful lesson. And the sort of third lesson in humanity came from Doc Barron, who's become a counselor, friend, coach, all of these wonderful things. And I'd known him for about 8 months, and we were kind of good friends. I didn't know he was Jewish. He tells me in my first therapy session, but to receive compassion from someone who we don't feel we deserve it from someone who comes from a group that I had dehumanized, was an incredibly powerful experience. And in the work of Life After Hate, which I co-founded, and I never would have got to Life After Hate if it wasn't for Doc. In the 10 years I was there, we probably helped over 700 individuals or families of individuals leave these movements behind. And there's predominantly 2 stories that show up over and over and over again. And that is the birth of a child as one that changes perception. And I'm not saying that some sort of fertility program for Aryan nations is the answer. It's not, but it created an opportunity to choose something different, and I did that. But that story shows up over and the other story that shows up over and over again is receiving compassion when we felt we didn't deserve it. In particular, from someone who we dehumanize. And I just want to say in a caveat here, I'm not suggesting for a moment that it's the responsibility or obligation of marginalized communities to do this work. It was something Dob felt he needed to do in his spiritual evolution, and that's where he was, he did it. It's an incredibly powerful gift should someone choose to give it, but it's not it's not the responsibility, obligation of different communities. But those were the three sort of pieces of compassion that led me to rehumanization.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you so much. Let's go to Kelly. Kelly, why do you do what you do?
I'll be short and sweet, otherwise I'll be here all day. I do what I do to try to create a better world, and you do it student by student, day by day, minute by minute. And it's an honor and a privilege to be sitting here with all of you and sharing my experience of seeing students in the audience and parents of students. That's how we reach one another, you know. And so that's honestly why I do what I do. It's not for the 2 months off. It's not for the paycheck. It's to try to create a better world for my kids, for myself, but also for the students that are here and their families.
Excellent. Maybe a complimentary question here, Kelly. So you have worked with students directly, still you are. So what do you see in the young generation about the global issues that goes on everywhere, the access to information, overabundance of information? What do you see in them with regards to conflict? How do they take those things?
Ooh. I find a lot of students are very curious. They want to inquire. They want to know. There's too much information that's out there, and I find that a lot of my students feel overwhelmed. Like, how do I sift through this in 5 minutes? Like, you can't do that, right? So it's about, I think, teaching them how to identify the sources that they're looking at, where they're coming from. You know, whether it be media literacy, digital literacy. But taking the time to develop a critical consciousness about what they're consuming is what I try to instill in them so that they can do it on their own. And a lot of it is just, how do we identify this? What are we looking at? You know, what is being sent our way? Because I think a lot of them do feel overwhelmed, and some of them have actually turned off of social media because it's burdening them with something that they have no control really over unless they just ignore it, kind of thing. And so we need to take the time as educators to teach them how to disseminate and deconstruct messages of hate, to understand the difference between free speech versus hate speech, which is, you know, complicated in itself. But I think it's having those conversations and a dialogue with them in a safe space where they can be open and feel vulnerable and know that they're not going to be judged based on maybe what they've learned, what they've been taught, and we can kind of make progress from there. I hope that was succinct enough.
Absolutely, thank you so much. So my next question to either Tony or Peter, because it comes from the film. A very interesting phrase again here. Identity, and you know, with the identity comes the idealism. And in today's world, when we see an increase of hate, especially anti-Semitism, and then followed up by Islamophobia, according to StatsCan recent report. So how do you really connect and then suggest for all of us to differentiate between identity and then idealism? Identity is, I think, a very core nature of all of us. We do seek identity. If we are threatened with regards to some of our identities, we tend to, you know, resist. So what have you seen in the past? How do you differentiate between these two things?
Well, I think the challenge is when identity and ideology, or identity and politics, becomes intertwined. So it's one thing to try and get someone to admit that what they believe is wrong. Try and get someone to admit that who they are is wrong. Because for me, the white supremacy and that neo-Nazi ideology wasn't just what I believed. It was who I was. It was the friends I had, the videos I watched, the books I read. It was the music I listened to. It was the badges on the clothes I wore. It was every aspect of my life. It was wrapped up in that identity. And the challenge in this polarizing society is that, you know, especially down in the States, you know, you're either red team or blue team, and there's a whole, and you, what you believe is based on the team you're on. Like it's so much more about identity as it is about the ideas in the head, and I think it's important to recognize and understand that. And you know, as a young person, searching for a place to fit in, searching for an identity, and I was, you know, this angry kid, and the punk scene and the skinhead scene is where I found that place to finally fit in and belong. And you know, I know Peter has said a couple times, well, what if the chess club found you first? And, yeah, that's a possibility, and but it wasn't enough adrenaline in the chess club for me. And I'm just going to share this really quick story. When I was at Life After Hate, I remember receiving an email from a mother, and her son was 18. He was neurodivergent, very bright, but you know, socially awkward. And she said, you know, my son's online 6 to 8 hours a night, and he's, you know, found this community of white nationalists. And she goes, I'm really terrified for him. What scares me the most is they have accepted and embraced my son in a way that no one has in his entire life. When he was in grade 7 on his 12th birthday, he invited the entire class to come to his birthday party. Not one kid showed up. And so you think about the thirst for community, the thirst for belonging, a place to fit in. You know, if the flat earthers had found him and offered him that same level of community that the white nationalists did, and the white nationalists knew exactly what they were doing, that kid would believe the earth was flat if that's what it took for him to find community and brotherhood and that type of thing. Peter, you want to add to that?
I think that provides a real solid foundation. You know, here in the States, there's been a lot of sociological research and study around shifting patterns of identity and tribal affiliation. And it's very interesting. I've seen this happen over my lifetime here in the United States. The party that you were affiliated with politically was never, it was never a defining characteristic when I grew up. And it's been very, very fascinating to see this shift towards identity being, as Tony is describing the way this happens. I've seen an identity increasingly become intertwined with political affiliation. And there is this inability to see outside one's point of view. Of course, you end up being siloed in a lot of ways, and you're getting all the information that just simply confirms your worldview. But as Americans have become less and less invested in faith and the church, and other aspects, more sort of traditional aspects of identity, we've really very much become strongly identified with our political affiliation. And as Tony says, when identity and ideology become so closely intertwined, it's not this ideology or these ideas that you see as they become who you are in a sense, right? And so by saying an idea is wrong, it means you're wrong. I know I'm repeating what Tony says, but I think it bears repeating. One of the things that we do in the curriculum that Tony and I have developed and around the world working with teens is we talk a lot about identity. And we have several different exercises that challenge young people to really think about where their identity comes from. Is it an internal sense of identity? What's come from, their family, from their school, from their community? Is their identity an acceptance of those ideas and that ideology and those concepts, or is the identity is it a reaction to those ideas, or is your sense of identity really come from a place where you've worked through those different things and come to your own conclusions about who you are in the midst of all of this, all this information around you. And I think it's really important for young people to understand that they have agency in terms of their identity, that life doesn't just happen to us, that we define and we redefine our identity on an ongoing basis. I think it's very easy as an adolescent to feel like life is happening to you and you're not investing in that process. So we really try and challenge young people to think about that because it's so crucial. You see, there's such a tribal approach to so many things. We're being polarized in so many ways. You see it here with political parties. We're seeing it in the Middle East right now, with the war. And that identity, it prevents us from seeing the humanity in one another, and it prevents us from seeing that we share more in common with people than the differences that we have. So it's tricky stuff. It's really important stuff to keep talking about.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much. So my next question would be about denial. And I was born in Bangladesh, and I was very thrilled to see a couple of seconds the case of Bangladesh genocide in '71. So Tony and Peter, to both of you, why do you deny when we have extraordinary amount of evidences in front of us, especially in today's world when we can access so many information just sitting here? What is the point of that somebody still denies the Holocaust, still denies the oppression and of the marginalized people? What are the core things that you have seen during your journey? Thank you.
So we believed, that in the whole sort of neo-Nazi white supremacist doctrine that there's a hive mind, a cabal of international Jewish bankers that pull the strings and control everything in the world, and that if there's a bad immigration policy, who's the person in the shadows opening the door, right? And we believe that so much of that perceived Jewish power came from the sympathy and guilt generated from the Holocaust. So if you could attack the narrative of the Holocaust, you could attack their base of perceived power. That would be the rational explanation as to what was behind it. Nobody says the Holocaust never happened or nothing happened. What they say is, well, they didn't have gas chambers. They couldn't have killed that many. It was typhus, it was starvation, it was, sure, there was some shootings and some hangings, but it was disease and all these other things. The most predominant one that's viral on social media, there's a fellow, I'm not going to mention his name, but he uses the analogy of the Cookie Monsters cooking cookies. How many cookies can you put in an oven, and it becomes a mathematical equation, and that's I remember when I was in that place, you get to a whole place where people are reduced to ledger entries. You don't see them as humanity. You see them as a math equation. And for me, I called up the crematorium banker and says, how long does it take to cremate a human body? And work backwards from there. What they didn't tell you is they cremate the coffin too. What they don't take into account in Holocaust denial is bodies that are starving, that are emaciated, that are put in crematories 2 at a time. And when you take all those factors in, everything counts. But if you take that initial ignorant and malevolent viewpoint, you can cast doubt on the story of the Holocaust and therefore undermine the perceived sense of power, and so that's what it's about.
Peter, do you want to comment about denial?
Sorry?
Do you want to comment about why do we deny Holocaust? And
I would say Yeah, I think all I'd want to add is that, we're seeing this dynamic play out in real time on the news every night in terms of the information that's coming out of the Middle East. And I'm hearing it in conversations every single day here in Brooklyn and New York City. And it's this approach where if you can poke holes into a little bit of data, if you can question one event and the veracity of it, or the accuracy of it, if you can tear a hole in that, then you can discount everything that the other side has to say about what's happening, right? And I think that's the denier mindset that Tony speaks to so eloquently, right? I mean, and again, we're seeing this playing out in real time. I know people who are very supportive of both sides of what's happening in the Middle East, and some information comes in about what really happened in a hospital or a bombing or some atrocity, and if that can somehow be discounted, then everything the other side has to say is therefore wrong. And I think it's something we've got to be really super careful about, right? And there's a lot to learn from the way the Holocaust denier's mind works, and what the goal is in terms of people questioning these larger truths, the larger, far more important truths.
Thank you, Peter. Kelly, you wanted to add? Yeah.
Oh, I was just saying we have 3 minutes for
10
Q&A?
10 minutes.
Okay, then we'll have Q&A with the audience.
Yes.
I'll just touch upon it just briefly, as you guys have already done very succinctly. It's about having an open mind and being critical of what we're consuming again, instead of just taking it for like 100% truth, what's being sent to you, without getting into the algorithms and echo chambers of social media. Like, that's a whole other skill we need to teach students, is how do we deconstruct that before we even have a conversation, because people will believe the first thing they see and they won't question it. And this is something I spend a lot of my time doing with my students. If something were to come up, well, let's talk about it. Why do you say that? Why do you think that? And trying to do that in a way that is compassionate, right? Like, I really love that not only analogy, but way of being, that we have to be more compassionate to one another. And I find that with these kind of topics, they get so emotional that goes by the wayside, and now you're questioning who I am and what I believe in, and I won't let you do that, and then walls get put up, and then you can't have a conversation anymore. So I think we really do need to kind of take those blinders off and build those relationships with one another, with students in the classroom or in the school, in the community, with parents, and have an open dialogue where we can hear from one another.
No, thank you so much. I mean, these are so prudent recommendations, and especially the digital literacy and media literacy. These are so critical nowadays. These are not only theories now. It ought to be taught in the classes. That's what I believe. And in our project, we actively involve media literacy component. So I think it's time to go to the floor. And so Belle is here.
So I'll just help out with, and Kelly and I will look for the questions. I just wanted to make, I don't have a microphone. I just wanted to make a quick comment that, over the course of the years, sometimes when there's been a crime, an anti-Semitic crime, someone in the justice system has the bright idea to say, let's bring him to meet a Holocaust survivor. I think it would be a lot more, I would not put someone like that who has not considered the hurt that they've caused and considered, what they've been thinking in their ideology at all. I would never put them with a Holocaust survivor. On the other hand, I think meeting people like Tony, who have turned their lives around and who have understood the underpinnings of this hate, would be much more helpful. Okay, I've said my piece. Any questions? Yes?
This is for Tony. So thank you for sharing your story and turning your life around. It's quite amazing. Apologies for that. So my question has 2 parts. Number 1, how did your parents feel when you became a neo-Nazi? Did that create conflict in your relationship with them? And I'm curious as to why you had all that early footage of you when you were younger. Why was that taken?
On the second part, I'm not sure what the question is.
Well, there's footage of you many years ago, right, when you were, I guess, part of that movement, correct? So what was the purpose of that? What was the purpose of that? Why was it taken back then?
Oh, that's CBC archival footage.
Okay, but you were much younger then, correct? When that footage was taken?
Yeah, that was like around 1990, 25, 30 years ago, 30, 35 years ago.
Oh. Could you repeat the question, please, so everybody can?
Sure. So the question is, there's footage of me when I'm younger. Why was that recorded? And because I was a very active and also in a leadership role within the white supremacist movement, I did a lot of television and radio interviews. That's why I was on Montel Williams. So those are from CBC archives from news clips. So that's why those things were recorded. Just as a quick note of interest, about 4 or 5 months ago, I actually did a podcast with Montel Williams. So that was an interesting reconnection. The first part, excuse me, my parents hated what I was into. My dad was bombed by the Germans during World War II in Liverpool. And so it's a really interesting way to be angry at your father, is to have a poster on your bedroom wall of the guy who sent the bombs.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Estelle Lamoureux, and my dad was a medic for 5 years during the Second World War. So I heard a few of his stories, but obviously he had PTSD being a medic. However, my question for you is, right now our schools are hurting and our teachers have a hard time understanding what they're supposed to be teaching. And what would you recommend as an approach? Because I've already spoken to Belle a little bit. What would you recommend as a way to bring students together? And I'm talking, Jewish students, Muslim students, and just the generic, which is what I was, a generic student, into the mix. What would you suggest how we start? Do you have an idea of what we could do? Because I'm in schools a lot, and the kids are in pain. They're really suffering.
Well, I think the first part to that, I think, is it's really difficult to hate people that you've met and that you know. So bringing students together of different backgrounds, different faiths, different all those things, to realize the humanity, I think that's an important piece. We built a curriculum which uses clips from the film, but at the core understanding, we talk about the 3 C's. That's curiosity, courage, and compassion, and how teach kids how to incorporate those 3 things. They're very powerful. Being curious about the other. Why does somebody believe what they believe, instead of responding to them with judgment. Just because you listen to someone doesn't necessarily mean you accept their viewpoint or you agree with them, right? So there's that curiosity piece is so much missing in our society, because we're just too quick to condemn, we're too quick to judge. I believe that the level to which we dehumanize other human beings in this world is a mirror reflection of our own internal disconnection and dehumanization. So we need to get curious and connect with the other. We do that with compassion.
So would you go as, I try to target even kindergarten, trying to teach values, like empathy, friendship, loyalty, all of those, because they're generic in one way, and that we should all embrace. So maybe that approach as well. But I have to say I'm so impressed with the film. It's very hard to watch, but I'm also very impressed. The key word for me that I'm pulling away from here is about belonging. And I think a lot of our kids don't feel it.
Yeah, and so if you think about the age, 13 is a big age where people start to become involved in the real search for identity. So that's that's a great age. The values, if you can get them in there before that period, is also important.